My father was a police officer. My father was a police officer. One morning, he was acting strange. I watched as he walked into the kitchen, wearing his uniform, headed for the coffee maker on the counter. He poured some into his favorite blue ceramic mug before sitting down across from me on the small, round wooden table. He brought the steaming blue mug to his lips. The smell of fresh, hot coffee filled my nostrils. It wasn't long before I noticed the bags under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Taking occasional sips from his coffee, he numbly stared out the window to the backyard. His dark, brown eyes seemed distant and filled with concern. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked, worriedly. The words seemed to make him snap from whatever trance he was in. "I'm fine, kiddo," he sighed. "Just eat your breakfast." It was more than clear that something was wrong, but I knew my dad. If he didn't tell me after I asked the first time, then there'd be no point in asking again. So I just nodded and went on to pour some more cereal into my bowl. As a couple minutes went by, I watched as he pushed back his chair and got up from his seat. "I gotta leave for work, buddy. I'll see you tonight," he chugged down the rest of his coffee and set the empty mug on the table, making a small thud as the ceramic hit the wood. He barely even looked at me as he walked out of the room. Later that night, I was woken up to the sight of my dad, sitting on the edge of my bed. The room was dark, but the dim, yellow glow of the hallway light creeping through the crack of the slightly ajar bedroom door was enough to help me make out the serious look on his face as he sat there, staring down at the floor. Confused, I turned on my side to look at the bedside clock on my nightstand. It read 2:45 a.m. I turned my eyes back to my dad. Is he just getting home from his shift? I asked myself, perplexed. After rubbing some of the sleep off of my eyes, I noticed he was holding his gun. "Dad," I muttered, my gaze fixed on the Glock in his hand. "You know that I love you, right, kid?" he blurted out, still staring down at his feet. That caught me off guard. He and I hardly ever said that to each other. Don't get me wrong, my dad and I had a great relationship. We just weren't good with that kind of stuff. "Yeah," I said, as I sat myself up. "I know." Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the living room, almost making me jump out of my skin. It sounded like the front door had been kicked open. Dad turned his head, focusing on the direction of my bedroom door for a few seconds before returning his gaze back down. I watched a mix of fear and sorrow wash over his face as he let out a tired sigh. I should have known. "It'd be back," he mumbled under his breath as he shook his head. "What you mean?" "I'll always be with you, you know," he breathed suddenly, still not looking at me. "Dad, what's going on?" I uttered, as dread started to spread through my body like a wildfire. "No matter where you go, no matter what you decide to do with your life, I'll always be with you." He tightened the grip on his gun as the words escaped his lips. "Please, Dad, just tell me what's going on," my shaky voice pleaded with him. "I love you, son," he said, as he finally turned to face me, a serious yet warm look on his slightly wrinkled face. "I love you too, Dad." It was always hard saying those words to him, but right then, they left my lips without me even realizing it, almost like a reflex. At that moment, part of me felt I'd regret not having said it more in the past. "Now promise me you won't get out of this room until you hear the front door open," he demanded, with a sharp look in his dark brown eyes as he stared straight into mine. What I muttered. "Why? Promise me," he raised his voice, inching himself closer to me. Why I pressed. Usually, raising his voice was all it took for me to do whatever he told me, but not this time. I was too scared. I needed to know what was happening. "Just promise me," son, his voice cracked. as he placed his hand on my shoulder. For a second, I thought I was going to see him cry for the first time. I couldn't form any words. The shock of seeing him like that, something I thought was impossible, knocked any form of speech out of me. So, with trembling lips and watery eyes, I just nodded. He sniffled and looked up at the ceiling for a few seconds, as if trying to make imminent tears fall back. With a sigh, he brought his gaze back to me and pulled me close, placing a kiss on my forehead before getting up and trudging towards the door. He stopped right as he reached the door and turned around to look at me. "I'm gonna do my best to end this here, once and for all." He then turned back around. Standing there, he looked down at his weapon and pressed the release button on the side of his pistol, extracting the magazine. After making sure it was full, he popped it back in and pulled back the chamber, making a satisfying click that echoed through the dark room. Gun in hand, he grabbed the doorknob, and I watched as he twisted it and pulled the door open, then shutting it behind him and leaving me in complete darkness. Sitting in my bed, in that pitch-black room, I waited and listened, my body shaking as I counted the seconds, not knowing what was about to happen. Suddenly, a single gunshot echoed through the house and was quickly followed by the rapid thuds of inhumanly fast footsteps. It sounded like a hammer hitting the hardwood floor 100 times within a second. A wet, munch sound echoed through the walls, accompanied by a loud grunt from my father, which was followed by a loud crash and the splattering of glass. And just like that, it all went silent again. I just sat there, heart racing. I wanted to run, to hide, to scream, but I couldn't move. It was as if my mind was wide awake inside a dormant body. Minutes that felt like hours went by. Sitting there, in complete darkness, I waited, building up the courage and telling myself I needed to do something. I needed to see if my dad was okay. Suddenly, the turning of the handle and the creaking of the hinges sliced through the silence of the night, and I watched in horror as the door started to slowly open. The silhouette of a man stood in the doorway, the faint, yellow light of the hall coming from behind him. It was hard to tell if the man standing across from me was my dad or an intruder. I sat there, not able to make a sound, waiting and hoping to hear my dad's voice emerge from the figure. Mere seconds seemed to drag on for an eternity. My heart was thumping against my chest, beating so hard I could feel it pulsating in my throat. Out of nowhere, a car slowly drove past the house, and its headlights flashed through the gap between my curtains, just enough for me to see the blue of my dad's uniform and the shine of his badge. Letting out a sigh of relief, I felt the tension in my body easing up. "Dad, you scared the hell out of me. What's happening? Did someone break in?" Whatever relief I felt before was ripped out of my chest as I watched my dad drop to all fours and crawl to a dark corner of the room. My mind started racing. This isn't dad, this man is not my dad. It's amazing how quick our brain can switch from relief to absolute terror. I tried my best to remain still, hoping that somehow it was going to keep the man crouched down in the dark corner to my right from hurting me. The whole time, I could feel him staring at me. I could hear his raspy breathing, just a few feet away from me. Let me tell you, feeling the full effects of adrenaline while your body is frozen with fear is like torture. I felt like my heart was gonna burst out of my chest at any moment. Somehow, I mustered up the courage to turn my head in the direction of the man. As soon as I did, he started to slowly rise himself up. The loud cracking of bones echoed through the room as he did so. A cold, numb feeling sank in the pit of my stomach. He was now standing up. At that moment, The only thing I could think of was the lamp on my bedside table. I needed to see him, to see it. Carefully, I reached out for the lamp next to me, and with a pull of the cord, the whole room was bathed into an orange shade of light. Staring at the man, my eyes went so wide they could have popped out of my skull. What I saw made my heart sink. He wasn't just wearing my dad's uniform. He was also wearing my dad's face. That man, that thing, whatever it was, it had carved my dad's face off and was wearing it like a damn mask. Blood was still dripping from it, running down the man's neck and streaking the blue of the uniform. I just sat there, terrified, eyes bulging, as the man stood in the corner, watching me. Through the holes where my dad's eyes used to be, I could see how lifeless the ones that replaced them were. The man tilted his head as he stared at me, almost as if he was admiring the sight in front of him. I don't even know how long he stood there. An hour, maybe 2. Out of nowhere, he dropped on all fours again and crawled out of the room with inhumane speed, making loud thuds as his hands and feet hit the floor. Even after he left, I still sat there for what must have been hours, still frozen. Eventually, I finally gathered the courage to go look. With my bare feet pressing against the cold hardwood floor, I slowly stepped my way towards the now wide-open door of my bedroom. As I entered the living room, my eyes scanned the place in search of my dad, but he wasn't there. His gun was on the floor, next to a pile of glass shards, in the frame of the broken coffee table. There was a huge trail of blood, leading from it towards the wide-open front door. I just stood there for a while, staring into nothing. The curtains swayed as the wind entered the house through the open door. After a while, I don't even know how long, I was finally able to snap out of it and call 911. After loads of questions, most of which I didn't have the answers to, they promised me they would catch whoever did this. They said my dad was one of them, and that they wouldn't rest until they caught the bastard. It's been 20 years. They never did. I lived with my Aunt Gemma until I turned 18. I went to college, got a business degree, and did well for myself. I'm 36 now. Same age my dad was when it happened. After all this time, I never really understood what happened to my dad. For most of my life, I avoided the topic like the plague. However, on my 36th birthday, my Aunt Gemma called me to congratulate me. But as we were talking, she said the strangest thing. "Oh, sweetie, and don't you worry about it." It was just an awful coincidence, her voice said through the phone. "What you talking about?" "Aunt Gemma," I replied, confused. "You know, the whole thing with your father and grandfather and turning 36. It was just a freaky and horrible coincidence." "Aunt Gemma, what you mean? What happened to Grandpa?" "Your father never told you?" "No, he didn't." "Oh, then it's better this way, sweetie. I don't want to worry over nothing." I tried my best to get her to explain, but she refused, and I ended up dropping the subject. How stupid I was. Anyways, it's been 2 months since I had that conversation with my aunt. The reason I'm telling you all of this is because about an hour ago, I looked through the window in my office at home, and I saw someone standing by the curb under the streetlight in front of my house. They were wearing a hoodie, which made it hard to see who they were. I was finally able to see their face when the person looked up at me. It looked like my dad. Next story. I'm a police officer. Tonight we kept getting the same call. All officers on duty, we have just received a call from a woman claiming that something is outside her home. Report to the scene immediately. I immediately step on the gas pedal and drive onto the highway. I look over at my partner Christian and give him an eyebrow raise. You think we're gonna see a monster tonight? I joke about the call. Shut the fuck up. Dawson Christian responds to me laughing. They said we should take every call seriously, but fuck it, I guess. I was supposed to be home in an hour so me and my wife, Michelle, could have a late night TV dinner, but it seems that at this rate, we wouldn't be able to. I was too nervous to call her at the moment because I didn't want her to get upset at my possible absence from home tonight. We continued driving down the highway and looked at the given address from the dispatcher. It was only a couple more minutes away, so I sped up a little bit to get there quicker. You think you're gonna have that TV dinner with your wife tonight now? Christian asks me. I shrug, watching the cars and street lights pass by. If this is the last call, hopefully. We haven't been able to do anything together for weeks, I sigh. I really miss the times we used to have together. I get what you mean. Work is a pain in the ass. Let's just get this call done. It's probably nothing, Christian reassures me. I take a turn and go into a silent neighborhood, pulling into a row of houses. I drive towards a diverting 2-story house. I double-check the address and look back at it. We were here. We get out of our car and we see the distraught woman who made the call outside of her home, awaiting our arrival. We quickly make our way over to her as she steps off her porch. I could see that she has been crying, seeing a stream of tears running down her eyes. Mom, it's okay, we're here now. Is the guy still outside your home? I put a hand on her shoulder and calm her down. I hear her sniffle. It's not a person, the woman cries. I can't even explain what it was doing. She stops mid-sentence and starts breaking down. Me and Christian look at each other and exchange concerned gazes before turning back to the woman. Where do you think it is? Is it still here? Are you even sure it's not a person? Christian says with a little more order in his voice. The woman continues sniffling. It's in the backyard. I'm sure it wasn't a person, just hurry. We tell the woman to go inside her home as we pull out our guns from our holsters and flashlights, since there wasn't a source of light coming from her backyard. We made our way into the backyard and flicked on our flashlights. As we stepped foot into the grass, I immediately got an eerie and unsettling feeling setting in me. I didn't hear or see anything yet, but I also didn't feel safe. Me and Christian moved our flashlights around and moved the light throughout the entire yard, taking prompt glances, but there was nothing in sight. You seeing anything? I say to Christian. He shakes his head. Nope, seems like bullshit so far, he responds, still glancing around. We both notice a deck beside us that connects to the house, and we move our flashlights below it. We didn't see anything from where we were standing, but we saw wooden poles holding the deck up that was blocking a portion of our view. We decided to check underneath the deck. The deck was pretty tall, so we walked towards it and just walked underneath it, moving our flashlights up and down to see if anyone was hiding down there. We figured it was pretty likely, since before, when we've gotten calls like this, people did hide under decks frequently. There wasn't anything under this deck though. For the most part, it was empty. It was long in length, so we walked across and checked it out in its entirety, yet we still didn't see anyone or anything. I lowered my flashlight and felt that something was off about all of this. I shook it off and was ready to rule this a false alarm when I heard Christian say, Dawson, come here. I made my way over to him and saw him hunched over in the far left corner of the deck. I got beside him and tried to see what he was looking at. What is it? I say as he gives me a confused look. Christian moves his hands through the dirt, picking up whatever he was looking at, and hands it to me, which I reluctantly take. I give a look at it. It was the leg of a dog, blood covered on the fur with teeth plunged into it. I gasped and dropped the leg, looking at Christian, who was equally as freaked out. What the fuck is this? I ask him. He gives no response. There was just shock written all over his face. I could see it in his eyes. I knew how much Christian hated seeing dead animals or animal remains, so I didn't question him. I looked back down at the leg and examined it. It looked like something was eating it, but as it bit down, all of its teeth came out of its gums, but I wasn't sure. It was a weird, disturbing sight and something I can't explain. I hesitate before taking the dog leg as evidence. I could distinguish a horrible, rotting smell to it, and the leg felt flabby. I wanted to vomit, but I knew I needed to take it with us. Me and Christian both get up as I started to feel pale. Holding the leg of a possible dead dog didn't sit right with me. Christian patted me on the back. I'll go in and talk with the woman. You can go sit in the car. All right, Christian seemed to be fine now. I nod my head and gulp. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I put the leg in the trunk and slam it down, feeling my phone vibrate in my pocket. I take it out. Michelle was calling me. I take a deep breath and answer it, putting my phone towards my ear. Hey, Michelle, I say into the phone, still feeling uneasy about the situation. Honey, are you okay? You're not home yet, I hear Michelle talk into the phone. I look at the ground below me. Yeah, I know. I'm probably going to have a late shift tonight. Sorry, I respond with guilt. Oh, that's fine, I guess. Is something happening? Yup, everything is fine. Just had to respond to a weird call, and I think about the dog's leg. Found a peculiar item I sighed into the phone. The other end is silent for a few moments. Well, I hope everything really is fine. It is. Trust me on this one. It's not a big deal, I say. I see Christian walk out of the house. All right then, but stay safe, Dawson, please. The call ends. Me and Christian get into the patrol car, sitting there for a minute, thinking about what just happened. I examined the neighborhood. It was dark. Almost every house had no light reflecting onto the street, and no street lamps were on. Just darkness. The vibe was unlike anything I've been in before, even in my 9 years as a police officer. What did the lady say? I finally say to Christian, beginning to start the car. I asked if she had any cameras so we could see anything enter our backyard, but she said she didn't. She said she saw some kind of creature in her yard eating some kind of animal. He motions his head to the back of the car, where the dog leg is. I understood what it meant. We probably need to take that dog leg to the station and check it out. Something feels supernatural about this. I went to say something, but I didn't. I agreed. No human could just rip a leg clean from a dog, and I don't think any human would have the audacity to try eating it. I wasn't going to jump to conclusions, but the call was something to take into account. We started to get a signal coming from a dispatcher on my radio. I quickly turn on my radio as me and Christian listen. We have just received 2 calls from people saying that something was in the backyard of their home. Officers are already en route to one address. I need other officers on scene at the other immediately. Christian and I lock eyes on each other out of confounding fear. Weren't we just at a call about this? We didn't say a word as I received the address and started speeding to it. It was only 6 minutes away, so not far. But something wasn't right about this. Something was going on and it wasn't good. We hear the radio crackling on again, and I start dreading what it's going to be about. I hear a dispatcher's voice come on again. We have just received another call from someone saying that something was walking around their property. We need officers on the scene. I repeat, we have just received a 4th call that something was walking around someone's property. What the fuck is happening? Christian says. My hands start shaking on the steering wheel as I take a turn. Something's not right, man, my voice quivers. Snap out of it, Dawson. It's gonna be fine. Christian tries to unnerve me. I shake my head. The radio crackles on again. Me and Christian listen carefully. We have received a call from a man saying that something was hanging out at the side of his house. Officers are on the scene now. Shit, I mutter to myself. I continue heading to the address that was originally sent to us, speeding up now. We were getting closer to our destination, and never has something happened like this. We've never gotten multiple calls in a row about someone being in people's yards. This was different though. These were reports on something in people's yards, whatever the hell that meant. It's never been on this caliber before. We pulled towards a house on the street, and we immediately had our guns drawn. After the last call, we checked out, and after hearing all of these other reports, we weren't taking this one lightly because something was seriously wrong. Me and Christian peeked our heads in the backyard but didn't see anything. The lights in the house were on, so at least we knew the resident was still okay. That was until we heard the sound of a man giving the most blood-curdled scream I have ever heard from inside the home. We immediately rushed to the front door, preparing to enter with force. Christian gives me a scared look, and I give him a signal to be brave. I look at the door and take a deep breath as I continue hearing screams. I wince as I take a step back from the door. I sprint toward the door and bash my entire body into it with all my force right as the screaming stops, knocking the door down as I come crashing down to the floor shoulder first. I see Christian run into the house with his gun, yelling out police. The screaming was still absent, and I began thinking that we were too late. The living room and dining room were in sight from the front door, and we didn't see anything in either room. That's when we decided to check the kitchen. I sensed that the kitchen was right around the corner, so we walked towards the living room and took a hard left around the wall. As we entered the kitchen, we saw the remains of a man hunched over the sink, mutilated from the neck down to his calf. I gagged a little bit, feeling the need to throw up. I put my head down, lowering my gun. We were too late. I didn't have time to beat myself up about it though, because I shortly felt Christian desperately trying to get my attention. I raise my head and see him pointing at the kitchen window. The kitchen window faced the entirety of the backyard, and I saw a dark figure that wasn't built or even shaped like a human quickly crawl out of the backyard, out of sight. Christian and I quickly moved to the back door and swing it open, swiftly making our way down the steps and sprinting farther into the backyard. We no longer saw the figure anywhere and rushed to the backyard gate, and we still didn't see anything. We ran and opened the gate and sprinted back into the front yard, but again, no sign of the figure we just saw. We lower our guns and sigh in disappointment. My question was though, what was that thing? And how did it get away so fast? I hear my radio crackle on again as I start to slowly walk towards the car. Officers have found a woman dead in her backyard. She has been impaled through the fence. It looked like she died just minutes ago. We need paramedics on the scene right away. What the fuck is happening? I hear Christian say. He slumps against the garage door and lowers down to the ground. I felt awful for Christian. It was clear this was a lot for him to digest. I understood though, this was also unexplainable. I got in the car and slammed the door shut, unsure what to do. I surveyed the street and tried to search for that creature more, but I still didn't see it. It truly just disappeared, gone with the wind. I heard my radio crackle on again. The dispatchers got another call from somebody saying that something was in their backyard. They needed officers on the scene immediately. I didn't know what to do anymore. I was convinced I was living in a hellish, repetitive nightmare, but I did the only thing that I could have done in that state I was in. I pulled out my radio and said, "We have found a man dead in his home." I repeat, we found a man dead in his home. I got home an hour later. It was almost 1 a.m. at that point, and I was exhausted. We had to wait at that house for paramedics to arrive and tell them what had happened. We had to take the dog leg to the station and explain to the sheriff what happened at that house. And it was a whole process that I won't bore anybody with. I reached for my keys in my pocket and fumbled with them for a second before inserting them into the lock and opening the door, breathing a sigh of relief that I was finally where I wanted to be. I threw my radio on a chair next to the front door, forgetting to turn it off. My joy was instantaneously taken away from me when I saw my wife's bloody head hanging from the ceiling. I screamed and fell to my knees and started crying. This was already a horrible night. I couldn't have lost Michelle too, not her. Honey. I heard Michelle's voice from the stairs, shortly before I heard her scream too. I got confused as I raised my head up and looked at the stairs, and there she was, standing on the stairs looking at the ceiling in shock. I looked back at the head on the ceiling. It looked almost exactly like Michelle, but how? If her head was there but she was alive on the stairs, then that meant... What the fuck? I didn't know how else to express my thoughts. I look at my overwrought wife. Did you hear anyone come in or anything? Michelle looked at me. I could see how terrified and utterly bewildered she was. Dawson, Michelle, this is important. Have you seen anything outside the house? No, I didn't hear anything come in either. I figured she was telling the truth. That still doesn't explain how identical the head was to my wife. The facial features, the hair, everything. I slowly got back up to my feet, walked past the stairs, and went towards the kitchen. Something was drawing me there, and my gut was telling me to go. What are you doing? What are you gonna do about this? Decapitated head? I heard my wife yell at me. I stuttered for a few seconds before putting my words together. I know I just... Hold on. I walked into the kitchen, looked at the counter, and nearly had a heart attack. Michelle, I shouted, but I didn't hear a response back. I continued looking at the counter. It was a head covered in blood that was almost identical to me. I tried to put two and two together, but I just couldn't. I didn't fucking know what was happening anymore. My mouth was agape, searching for more words to say, but I was fearful of this situation. These heads, who were they originally? And how did they get here? I felt my phone buzz in my pocket and I pulled it out. It was a text from Christian. Normally he doesn't text me this late, so I was confused. I opened it. I looked closely at the text. It read, "I'm still on my shift and we got a call from someone saying that they saw something in their neighbors' yards. I got the address they provided. It's your house. Don't panic, I'm on my way." My heart dropped reading this. I still didn't know what things were going into people's yards to do whatever the hell knows, but I didn't want to find out. I was unsure of everything at this point. Michelle, I continued saying my wife's name, but I still didn't hear a response back from her. I walked out of the kitchen and saw her standing at one of the back doors by the dining room, looking out to the backyard, shaking. I went next to her to see what she was looking at. That's when I saw it. The same dark figure I saw earlier was standing in the middle of our backyard, staring dead at me. I could make out some of its features this time, though. It was tall and bulky. Its arms and claws were so long that it just looked unnatural. I couldn't make out any of its facial features, but I could see its eyes. There was nothing but darkness in them. I didn't feel anything anymore looking at it. I lost all feeling in my body and mind. I only felt fear and trepidation. I felt like a bomb ready to explode. What was once me responding to calls living this was now me living through it myself. There was a strong ambience now, and the creature had an emanation that made my heart beat faster and faster. My actions and thoughts started to feel that they were getting flooded and breached with something otherworldly. I was feeling abstracted now. One thought, and one thought only crossed my mind. My phone was still in my hand. I opened it, dialing 911. I looked at Michelle as she was inching closer to me by the second, not saying a word. I looked back at the thing that was out in our backyard. It got into a crawling position, and it was making noises that I couldn't even tell what it sounded like. I put my phone to my ear as I hear a dispatcher pick up. 911, what's your emergency? I don't say anything for a moment. All I can do is look at the creature. Look at the being that was in my backyard. What's your emergency? The dispatcher repeats themselves. I finally find the courage to say something. Something I didn't think I was going to say that night. Something is standing out in my backyard. I start to hear my radio crackle seconds after saying that.